We're going to spend some time talking with Dr. Carmen Joy Imes. She is an associate professor of Old Testament at Talbot School of Theology, individual that has graduated with her PhD from Wheaton College and MA in Biblical Studies from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. We'll be talking about the book Being God's Image, but I might mention the previous book, Bearing God's Image, Why Sinai Still Matters. This one, Being God's Image, Why Creation Still Matters. She has appeared on nearly 100 podcasts, and so we have some links to that and information. She is a member of the Evangelical Theological Society, the Society of Biblical Literature, serves on the board of the Institute for Biblical Research, and all sorts of other great information about her, which is on our website at pointofview.net. Dr. Imes, it is a delight to have you on the program.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a joy to be with you.
I guess the first question anybody might ask is, Being God's Image is kind of a follow-up. So if you do have an interest in this book, you can click on her picture or scroll down, and if you click on there, you'll see it's coming out, so you could pre-order it if you would like to get it. And then, of course, you also have the previous book, Bearing God's Image. Connect the two, because some people might think, well, should I buy the first book and then the second, or how to do this?
Yeah, sure. So just a quick correction. The previous book is Bearing God's Name, and I made myself... I tied everybody in knots by having such similar titles. Bearing God's name came out of my dissertation research, and it's on the command not to take the Lord's name in vain. So I take a non-traditional approach to that passage, but what I think is the right way of reading it, which is much broader than how we usually think about it. Usually we think about that command as prohibiting a certain way of talking about God, or prohibiting the use of his name in certain ways or certain contexts. And I argue that it's much broader than that it's about representing God well among the nations. God places his name on his people to say, you are mine. And so then those of us who are part of his family represent him to the watching world. So that's the first book. Lots of people, after reading that, ask me, well, isn't that kind of like Being God's Image? Don't we also represent God as humanity? And so this second book is my attempt to answer that question, but you can read them in any order. So either order works.
Well, and again, I think there is a similarity also in that in your first book, you were sort of dealing with some of the misconceptions and maybe false assumptions about what it meant to actually take God's name in vain. But here in this one, you're really dealing with some of those false assumptions about the image of God. So in some respects, you've been working overtime to try to clear up all the misconceptions, which unfortunately we pass on with bad theology, bad preaching, or even talk show hosts that couldn't get the name of the book right. So I guess we can solve that problem pretty simple.
Not talk show hosts.
Yes. Let's, if we can, get into this, because we're going to talk about humans in God's world, and then humans and being human in God's new world. And so you really take us back almost immediately, as you would imagine, to creation, Genesis 1. And you really talk about this idea of both the pattern of creation and that we're the crown of creation. Can you fill that in for us?
Sure. One of the first things that I have to address is the controversy about the creation narrative. And Christians across the spectrum of how they read Genesis 1 and how they understand its relationship to science have often come to this chapter as a battleground, or to weaponize it against those of other views. So one thing I had to just clear out of the way right out of the gate is, what are we reading when we read Genesis 1? And what I'm trying to do is help people set aside their views on how God made the world long enough to consider why he did it. And I believe that Genesis 1 answers that question, why? What is this world for? More emphatically than even the how question. And so if we can set aside our differences on the how question, then we can unite around what is the purpose of humanity in this creation.
And it does seem to me that no matter what particular view of creation you might hold to, it does seem to me that I think we can all at least agree and hold hands on the fact that God has created us as unique. And in some respects, when we talk about this idea, we are in some respects related to the creation, dust to the ground. But in another way, we're different than the rest of the creation because we're in God's image. And so you have to hold those kind of in tension, don't you?
You do, yes. There is definitely continuity between humans and the rest of creation. as you said, made from the dust, made alongside other creatures on day 6 of creation. And so we share an essential similarity with creation, but the scriptures are so clear that when God makes humans, he pulls out all the stops and does something really special, that he appoints humans as his image to rule over the rest of creation. So from the very beginning, humans have an exalted status and a special relationship with God, unlike that of other creatures.
Let's see if we can get into some other aspects, because I did want to talk about this idea of getting to work. And of course, we've talked about this before, because if we're created in God's image, then that brings us to words like dominion and stewardship and work and toil and all those kinds of issues. If you'll permit me, Carmen, to maybe jump ahead, because Chapter 8 has a section on disability and the image. And the reason I wanted to bring it up is that was something else I was going to say before the break, because we've talked about artificial intelligence, we've talked about bioethics, but we just recently have done some programming on the whole issue of special needs children. And I thought it was striking that you have a chapter in that. And I'd found in some of the introductory material to your book that you'd actually read one of the books, Bethany Fox's book, Disability in the Way of Jesus. And so that's another topic and another illustration why this whole idea of God's image is so important.
Yes, it really is. This has been maybe the biggest surprise for me as I worked on the book. I knew that if we got the doctrine of the image of God right, that if we really understood what it meant to be human, that it would have implications for a host of different areas of life and different types of people and situations. And disability is one that just really grabbed me as I was working on the book, realizing how important it is for us to affirm that every human being is fully the image of God. There's no sliding scale of being God's image, that some people possess more than others. And if we believe that's true, then every human being has dignity and is worth protecting, providing situations, environments where they can flourish. This is so important for us to think about.
Well, again, I love how you bring these two together, because in Chapter 4, you have the Human Project, and then you have the intermission, being the image and bearing the name, which kind of pulls the two books together. And that's an important aspect of that as well. It makes sense that once we are going to be certainly bearing God's name as image bearers, we have to put those two together. And so in some respects, these two books come together. So again, those are some important issues. But I thought, jumping ahead again, you have a whole chapter on Jesus the human, the incarnation. And most of the time, I'll be honest, and I'm guilty of this as well, when we talk about being created in God's image, we go to Genesis 1, 27, 28, and that's it. But we learn some things about God's image in the person of Jesus, and that's why you've devoted a chapter to it.
Yes. Yeah, it's really important for me to help people see threads that run through the whole Bible. And so here, I didn't feel like we could talk about what it means to be human without looking at Jesus, who is God made flesh. He took on human nature so that he could show us what it should look like to be human. A lot of times people talk about the image of God as if it's something that was lost after the fall, that there was some, or at least diminished or destroyed. And I argue, based on my reading of Genesis, that the image is still intact after the fall. That the Bible doesn't say that we've lost it, but there's obviously something that's broken. The relationship of close intimacy with God is estranged, and what we need to look to Jesus to see what does it look like to live fully in alignment with our identity as the image of God. He displays all the glory that's meant to accompany that role, and the glory that we often fail to display because we are not living in alignment or in congruence with that identity that God gave us.
So again, that's more than just a look at the incarnation. You, of course, talk about the issue of navigating embarrassment, of course, his own shame, confronting injustice, as well as confronting unbelief and a number of other things, reversing impurity. So there is a sense in which if we really want to understand what it means to be an image bearer, we certainly can look to the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, but we can also look to Jesus as the perfect man, fully God, fully man, in the incarnation. And so just a very powerful focus as well. But I thought, again, I wish we had a little more time, but we probably can do this in the future, especially when the book comes out. from creation to new creation, because that's the next question that people have. Okay, now I understand that I'm created in God's image, and if I've accepted Jesus Christ and I'm a new creature, 2 Corinthians 5:17, what does that mean? And it does seem to me that you've got some very important statements that we need to think about now as we still live on earth and are kingdom followers.
Yeah. You know, I think one of the most common misconceptions among Christians is that it's because of our faith that we're going to heaven when we die. And we think of Christian faith as a kind of fire insurance. This is how we're escaping hell. And so we'll have an eternity in a disembodied state, just kind of happy all the time in the presence of God. And as I read Scripture, I'm deeply convinced that creation still matters, that Christ, so we like to talk about Christ's death on the cross for our sin, but we don't spend enough time on the resurrection and the fact that it was physical and embodied. Jesus rises physically from the dead, and his risen body is not meant to be just a one-off miracle that shows us the power of God, but it's meant to be the first fruit. Paul calls him, Jesus, in his resurrected body, the first fruit of a new creation. And that means that you and I and everyone listening to this show is also going to be raised from the dead in our bodies, that our bodies have a place in the new creation. And so I think if we can really grasp this, and if we realize that our future is embodied, that it changes the way that we treat our bodies now and the bodies of other people. It changes the way we think about creation care, that this is not just some temporary thing that we engage in, but that it actually matters for the long term.
Again, I think of Nancy Pearcey's book, The Body, and many of others that are addressing that issue. And also, just the fact is, when you talk about a body, we reject this idea of Gnosticism, that the body is just kind of a temporary vessel, which gets us into some of the gender issues we're talking about right now. So this book is just chock full of important issues that then can branch out into many of the topics we address here on the program. But Dr. Imes, for just a minute, let's, if we can, mention that near the end of your book, you have discussion questions. And while I would certainly recommend this book for an individual that would really like to understand more of what it means to be in God's image, because you have those discussion questions, it occurs to me that the way you've written it, this could be a small group Bible study or discussion group, couldn't it?
Definitely, yes. The same with Bearing God's Name. Lots and lots of groups have used it for book studies, even for classroom reading, and use those discussion questions. And I also have QR codes. This was me kind of breaking new ground with InterVarsity Press. They hadn't done this before. But as I was writing the book, I kept thinking of videos from the Bible Project that I wanted to show people as I was writing. But as people read this chapter, there are several videos that would be so helpful. And so IVP agreed to let me put in QR codes that go with each chapter that will take you right to Bible Project videos that link with the themes. So that also makes it easy for a group to use, because then you can gather together. Having read the chapter, you can watch the videos together and then discuss the questions. I hope that it will be a rich learning experience.
Let's also talk about your website. And, of course, we have a link to the YouTube channel. And so I can see Torah Tuesday, as well as all sorts of different podcasts. So talk about some of those, because, again, as a professor of Old Testament at Biola and Talbot, this is a way in which some individuals can benefit from you, and they don't necessarily even have to be enrolled in your class and be taking a course.
Yeah, that's right. So every Tuesday I release a video called Torah Tuesday. They're about 5 to 10 minutes long, and I'm writing a commentary on the book of Exodus right now. So most of my Torah Tuesday videos are about Exodus. I'm just working my way through the book, sharing nuggets of insight that I've discovered along the way as I'm translating and researching and writing, things that I think pastors and lay people might be interested in hearing. And I also use my YouTube channel as a repository of other video content that's out there on the web, sermons or lectures or conference talks that I've given in other places, or podcast interviews that are also posted on YouTube. So there's lots and lots of content there for people to listen to if they want to dig in deeper.
Again, we have a link to your website. We have a link to your Facebook page, your Twitter feed, and of course, we have information about this book, which is going to be coming out next month, I believe. And so if you'd like to pre-order it, supposed to come out June 6th, then you can do so. Right. And we'll see if we can have you back and also talk about that one as well as bearing God's name. I think I got it right this time. So I think we're learning
right.
here.
Good job.
So let's, if we can, encourage people to find out a little bit more about Carmen Joy Imes. And again, you can find all of that at our website, pointofview.net. Thanks for joining us. And I hope you, again, have appreciated all that we've talked about today right here on Point of View.